Aaron, it's Aaron. Hey, it was really great talking to you today about Roatan and Honduras, and I'm happy to answer some of the questions that you had about Americans paying taxes and living in Honduras. So I'm not going to go into the Honduran tax code in any great detail. I want to talk about this more broadly. Everybody's tax picture is different, and there's lots of different complications, so I just want to kind of give you and your clients an overview. The reality is that I think from what you said, about 15,000 Americans are living in Honduras right now. So you can imagine, Americans are retiring all over the world, especially also because of the pandemic and the ability to now work remotely for many companies. Americans are living and working all over the world, etc. So there are two characteristics that really drive your tax picture if you're in one of these categories. First of all is your residency. What country considers you a resident? And number two, where are you producing that revenue? And if you're in California, if the revenue is being produced in California by California clients, where are the material benefits of your production being realized? California in particular considers that if you're self-employed, you're doing work for a California client, then in many cases you also need to do a California tax return, even if you are working overseas. So if you're self-employed, you're doing work for Californians, be very mindful about segregating your self-employment income between the income and expenses associated with California and those expenses and income that's not associated with California income. So just a side note, but in general, from a tax standpoint, it's predicated on where you are a resident of. So the United States says that if you're a U.S. citizen, you will always be taxed on your worldwide income. Okay? That's dividend income, pension income, potentially Social Security, wage income, etc. So you know that. Many countries, especially Honduras, will also tax you on your worldwide income if you're living in the country or you're in the country for more than a certain number of days. So you have to be mindful. Every country is going to have those rules. However, nobody wants you to pay double for this, double taxes on the same income. So the U.S. has two different methods in which you can deduct taxes that you paid overseas or reduce the taxation on foreign income. Many countries, especially in Europe, have similar types of mechanisms that you can use. So I'm going to talk about two of the main mechanisms that you can use to avoid double taxation, and then I want to talk a little bit about itemizing your tax deductions and self-employment. So in general, from a residency standpoint, if you're paying taxes in Honduras, the U.S. will allow a foreign tax credit. In other words, if you prepare your Honduran tax return first, you identify what the taxes are. In many cases, you can take a tax deduction here for those taxes that you paid over here. It's called a foreign tax credit. There's a number of different factors behind that. Again, talk to your tax advisor, but more broadly, do your foreign income taxes first. How much did you pay? Or how much were you liable for, and you take a credit here for those taxes. The other aspect of it too is what's called a foreign income exclusion. And what this means, you can imagine that, let's just say that you're working for a Honduran company, okay? So you can deduct up to $112,000 plus or minus of foreign income off your U.S. tax return. However, to do that, you need to start with being out of the U.S. for more than 330 days. And after that period, you're considered a bona fide resident. So the reality is that if you're going to be working overseas, either from a self-employment income standpoint or for a company, make sure that you leave the U.S. and you don't come back for more than 330 days. It's very important because if you come back to the U.S., you could invalidate that, and then you need to start the clock over again. So just be very mindful about it. Be mindful also that in the first year, you may not have access to the full tax deduction, it can be limited by the number of days in that calendar year that you were working overseas. So just something to be mindful about. Once you're overseas for more than 330 days, then you can qualify as a foreign resident. You can come back and forth. So just know that. So again, talk to your tax advisor about it. I want to talk a little bit about foreign income, especially if you're self-employed. So if you're self-employed and you're working overseas, whether you're working for U.S. companies or foreign companies, etc., just know that the U.S. government will tax you on that revenue. And the tax that you're going to be paying is what's called a self-employment tax. This is tax for your Social Security and Medicare. So if you want to keep earning Social Security and Medicare benefits on the self-employment income that you're earning overseas, you're going to pay a self-employment tax. Now be mindful too that in some countries, if you live there long enough, you have to pay an equivalent self-employment tax, in which case you may be eligible to receive not self-employment income, but like Social Security. So if you're eligible to receive Social Security, say Germany or somewhere else, and that income is being taxed appropriately, you can imagine now you're paying double taxation there. The U.S. has tax treaties with many countries that help you to avoid double taxation on your self-employment. So in other words, just be mindful that if you are self-employed, you still may have to pay self-employment tax to the U.S. But also be mindful too is that in the U.S. you qualify for what's called a QBI deduction, which can deduct up to 20% of your income off your U.S. tax return. You aren't qualified for that if you're living overseas. So just be mindful that your tax picture will change if you're living overseas, and make sure you talk to your tax advisor, maybe a year before you leave to do some detailed planning. Also try and understand the tax code of the other country. So again, in general, to wrap this up, you could be in a situation where you're paying double taxation. There are mechanisms to potentially avoid that. They're not perfect, but the more planning that you do in advance, the better. So I hope you have a wonderful day, and Lauren, I look forward to talking to you again soon. Bye.